Okay, today's daf is Kuf Yud Gimel. We're going to start on the top, second line, continuing with practical advice from the Chachamim for life. Amar le Rav Ravasi. Rav said to Ravasi, Lo tadur b'mata de lo tzanif basusya velo nabach ba kalba. Don't live in a city where the horses don't neigh and the dogs don't bark. Okay, what's the reason? So Rashi explains the reason is because that's what gives security to the town. That, if there's any trouble, you hear the horses neigh, you hear the dogs bark. If you don't have any alarm, that was the ancient equivalent of an alarm system, basically. If you don't have an alarm system, then there's no protection from various kinds of enemies or distress that can come upon the community. And don't live in a city that the head of the community is a doctor. Interesting. Why? Because he's going to be so busy with his patients, he's going to be so busy taking care of people, he's not really going to be able to give sufficient attention to the managing of the affairs of the town. And on the previous Amud, it had said, don't live in a town where Talmidei Chachamim are in charge of the community, because they're going to be too busy learning Torah, they're not going to have time to take care of what they need to do. Velo tinsiv tarte, don't marry two wives. In nasvat tarte nasiv tilat, and if you do marry two wives, marry a third one. What's the reason? Because if you're going to marry two, it's going to give you a lot of tzarot, and maybe they're going to gang up against you. If you have three, then at least one of them won't fall in with the other two, and will let you know that there's trouble brewing, before it's too late. Amar le Rav le Rav Kana. Rav said to Rav Kana, hafoch b'nevelta, v'lo tepoch b'mileh. He said, you would be better off turning over nevela. In other words, like skinning, animals. Okay, Rashi says pishot nevelta, taking the skin off of dead animals. In other words, doing a lowly manual labor, but not changing your word. In other words, not getting into a business where it seems like it means not getting into a business where you're going to have to be dishonest. Right? Oh, I'm sorry. Right. So that was hafoch b'nevelta. That's turn over nevela. Meaning work, do the dirty work of with the dead animals. It's better doing that than turning over your word. Peshot nevelta, skin nevela b'shuka v'shakil agra. Better to skin dead animals in the shuk, in the marketplace, and receive money. V'lo kahana ana v'gavra rabba ana v'sanya b'milta. And don't say about yourself, I'm a kohen, I'm a great person. It's beneath my dignity. In other words, do what you need to do to make a living, and don't think about your own kavod when it comes to making a living. So the first one was better to make a living in a business where you don't have to be dishonest, or you don't have to be involved in any kind of bad talk, and better to be involved in a type of labor that might be beneath your dignity. Don't think about it that way. Salkat le'igra sherutach, take with you to the roof whatever your food is. In other words, bahadach. So he says, always carry your food with you. Don't leave your food around. Don't disrespect the food that you have. But you should, if you're going up to the roof to work, bring the food with you. In other words, you should take good care of the provisions that you have. Rashi says, when you go out on the way, even if it's a short trip, make sure you take food along with you for the way. Okay, and he says, even if you can buy 100 gourds in the city for one zuz, to take kanafech nevu, they should still be under your cloak. In other words, even if food is cheap, you shouldn't treat it with disrespect. In other words, you shouldn't treat it as less than it really is, just because you paid a little bit for it. Amar le Rav l'chiyah brei. Rav said to Chiyah his son, Lo tishtei sama, don't take too much medicine. And Rashi says there are a couple of reasons here. One reason is because perhaps you're going to end up getting addicted to them, basically. Or it could be because medicines have side effects. Rashi says both of these ideas. He says, Velo teshaver nigra, don't jump over holes in the ground. In other words, don't exert yourself in dangerous ways, jumping over pits and stuff like that. Velo ta'aker kacha, don't have a tooth pulled out if you're able to heal it in its place without pulling it out. Velo tekaneh b'chivya, and don't start up trouble with a snake. Okay, you don't mess with snakes. So why are you starting? And don't mess around with non-Jewish people. In other words, don't get involved in any kinds of. Don't provoke them. In other words, don't provoke the authorities. Don't provoke Gentiles, because if there's anti-Semitism brewing, you might not realize what you're going to unleash. It's always dangerous to provoke people because you don't know how far they're going to go. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Gimel in mitkanin behen. There are three that you should never get into any kind of beef with. Ve'elohen nochri. One is a non-Jew, because non-Jews, especially in those times, had a lot of anti-Semitism going around, and you provoke them a little bit, and you don't know what kind of firestorm is going to be unleashed against you. Katan, a child. Ve'nachash. Okay? And, I'm sorry, Nochri katan, v'nachash katan, v'talmid katan. You shouldn't go in against a small, meaning an insignificant, an unimportant Gentile. Thank you. An unimportant Gentile, and a nachash katan, a small snake, or a talmid katan, or a small student. Why? Literally, that means their kingship is behind their ears. So, it's standing behind their ears, which means to say, right now we might be an insignificant non-Jew, but wait till he gets to a position of power. Right now he might be a small snake, wait till he gets big enough to get you back. Wait till this Talmid, who you think is an insignificant student, he becomes the head of the Bet Din, and you're in trouble, and you get in for the court case, and now this guy that you bullied is, he's going to be, your life is in his hands. So, Amar le Rav le'evo berei, Rav said to Evo his son, Tarachi bishmata, I tried teaching you Torah v'lo mistayem miltan. I wasn't able to get through to you. Obviously, you're not meant to be one of the Talmidei Chachamim. You're not going to make it. So therefore, ta'ag marach b'milei de'alma. I'm going to teach you instead how to do business, because you're not going to be one of the Talmidei Chachamim. If only the people in Israel today read this Gemara, they said not everybody is going to be, in the Kollel. Yeah. So he says, and this is Rav saying it to his own son, I tried teaching you, it didn't work out. You're not going to be one of those people who spends their life in Torah, so go out to business. When there's still sand on your feet, zabinach zabin, you should sell anything that you can. In other words, when you go on a trip and you come back with wares that you've purchased for sale, you bought wholesale or whatever, now you came back to sell retail, sell it right away while there's still dust on your feet, and then go back and get more. In other words, don't get lazy. Don't sit on your laurels. Don't bring the stuff back and then put it in the shop and wait. Make sure to sell everything that you've purchased as soon as possible. He says, anything that you sell, you're going to regret it later. In other words, whenever you part with something, you always think afterwards, maybe I shouldn't have sold that, maybe I should have kept it, maybe it was wrong, except for wine. Why? Because he says, with wine, it might spoil anyway, so better that you got the wine off your hands ahead of time. Shari kisech petach sakech. He says, first you should open your purse before you open your bag. What does that mean? It means make sure the guy pays you before you give him what he bought. Right? Because if you give him what he bought, he says, I'm going to owe you the money, you're never going to see it again. Or you may not see it again. Kavame ar'a velo korame igra. Better to get a kav from the ground than a kor from the roof. What does that mean? A kav is 1/180th. Okay, a kor is 180 times a kav. So it means better to get less from the ground, meaning to say, get in a local way. Don't go on a trip to Timbuktu in order to get more, but there's so many risks and expenses involved. Better to focus on the local, easier way and get less. It's simpler. Tamra v'chaluzach lebeit sudana. He says once you have you have dates in your bag, okay? Once you have a vessel of dates, run right away to make beer out of them. Okay? It says Tamra v'chaluzach lebeit sudana rahit. Run to make beer out of them. Why do you make beer out of them? Because if you sit around with the dates, you're either going to just eat them, or they're going to spoil. But when you make beer out of them, you have something not only that you can drink, but you can sell. So it's more profitable. How far should you go? You should only keep up to 3 se'ah of dates. After that, you should already be running with them to make beer out of them, because just leaving them around the house, it's not going anywhere. It's an investment if you make them into beer. Rav Papa says, if I had not gone into the beer making business, I wouldn't be rich. Some say Rav Chisda says, I wouldn't have been rich if I hadn't gone into the beer business. My Sudana. Why is the guy who makes beer called Sudana? Amar Rav Chisda said, Sod na'eh. That it comes from the word Sod na'eh. It's a good secret. In other words, people don't realize how profitable the beer business is. You take a little bit of dates or whatever you're able to make the beer out of, and you're able to make a lot on it. And also, he says it comes from Ugmilut Chasadim, and it's also a source of Gmilut Chasadim of Chesed, because you can give out the beer. You could bring people in, and they would drink it as a regular beverage. They didn't think of it like we think of it as an alcoholic beverage. They thought of it as just a regular thing to drink. So it's something that you can make a lot of out of a small amount of fruit, and then you're able to distribute it to people as Gemilut Chasadim. Amar Rav Papa says, Kol agav gavya ba'e. Don't forget, here's the practical advice. Anything on credit, you have to collect it. In other words, even if you have a contract or you have an IOU that says that somebody owes you something, you still have to go through the process of collecting it. So it's not as valuable as having cash in the hand, right? Like they say, a bird in the hand is worth two in the bush, we would say in English, right? It's, you still have to collect it. Kol ashrai, safek ate, safek lo ate. Anything that's on credit, maybe you'll be paid, maybe you won't be paid. So in other words, what he's saying is, deal as much as possible with cash. And when they do pay you, they're going to give you bad money. In other words, a person, once somebody gets what they want, right, they're going to pay you with as late as possible and as little as possible. So if they can pay you junk and they can pay you in 10 years, that's what they'll do. They're not going to pay you now good stuff, because they already got what they wanted. So that's why he's saying, if you have an IOU or you gave the person merchandise already, you're at a disadvantage. Gimel Dvarim, Amar Rabbi Yochanan Mishuman Shei Yerushalayim. There were three things that Rabbi Yochanan said in the name of the people of Jerusalem. He said, if you go out to war, be in the back, don't be in the front lines. Now, I would have thought that meant because you don't want to be killed. But actually he says no, so that if you have to flee before the enemy, you're the first one who gets back home. And you run back, you'll be the first. So then he says, this is a famous one, that it's better to make your Shabbat a weekday, meaning don't overspend on Shabbat and then say, I'm in debt, I need more money. Instead, make your Shabbat a weekday. Don't spend so much money, and don't require tzedakah from people. And get yourself involved with somebody who's successful. In other words, you see somebody, their business is going well, that's the person you should partner with. Don't look at somebody who's a miskin, who's doing poorly, and say, hey, I should partner with him and help him out. He's going to drag you down. Go with somebody who's doing well, fortune is smiling on that guy, and you should take advantage of it. And the Gemara goes on to say that Shlosha Dvarim Amar Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi Mishuman Shei Yerushalayim. Rabbi Yoshua ben Levi said three things in the name of the people of Jerusalem. Al tarbeh baganut. He says, and the way that Rashi explains this is, don't do things outwardly. Don't be out in the public doing things that relate to your business. Why? Mishum Maaseh Shaya. He says because of the situation. Because of the situation that happened. What is the situation that happened? It's talking about David and Bathsheba. In other words, why did the David and Bathsheba thing happen? Because Bathsheba is taking a bath on the roof. Right? Keep things private. Be as private of a person as you can about your personal affairs. Don't broadcast them. You broadcast them, you bring upon yourself other trouble. So it's better to keep things private. And bitcha bagra. If your daughter gets old enough, shachrer avdecha v'tenla. Free your slave and marry him to her. In other words, don't go around looking for a chatan for your daughter. It's a lot of stress. Better that you free your slave and marry him to her. And I would take that to mean, what it's trying to say is, better take somebody that you know, it might not be the Mr. Perfect, but somebody you know this guy for many years. He's not Mr. Perfect. He's not, an Eser, but he's good enough. Better, right? A known quantity. The guy is better that you marry your daughter to that than you go searching and you get somebody that you think it's a good deal and it's not such a good deal. This is good advice for you, but you don't have a daughter. Be careful with your wife, with your first son-in-law. What does that mean? So, either it means because, hey, he's a young guy, she's young and handsome, and you don't know what's going to happen between your wife and him. You're not so young and handsome anymore. You might be handsome, but you're probably not young if you have a son-in-law. So you got to watch out. Or mammon, that she's going to give a lot of money to him because, it's the first married couple, the first child that gets married off, they get the benefit that, the parents still have money to give them, right? That's the second one, sorry, we ran out. But the first one, they give a lot. So you got to watch your money. And both of them are true, the Gemara says. Rabbi Yochanan says, there are three people who are going to get Olam Haba. Who are they? Hadar be'eretz Israel. Somebody who lives in Israel, they automatically get Olam Haba, so we better all go right away. Somebody who raises their children with Talmud Torah, raises them with Torah education. That's the easiest one. And somebody who makes Havdalah wine after Shabbat. Okay, I'll take this to the third one. I can't move to Israel, and yeshiva tuition is too expensive, but I'll make Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat. No, but the Gemara says no, because why should that get you into Olam Haba? The answer is because this is talking about a person, he doesn't have a lot of wine to go around, and he saves that last bit of wine. Instead of he wants to enjoy it now, but he saves it for Havdalah. In other words, he makes sacrifices to be able to say Havdalah. If it's just a person who has 25 Manischewitz jugs, it doesn't make a difference to him, but the person who's really scrimping in order to make Havdalah on Motzei Shabbat, that person has a special merit. There were 3 people that Hashem announces about them how great they are every day. Who are they? A single guy, a bachelor who lives in the city and doesn't do any sins. In other words, he's able to keep himself out of trouble. That's one. We read about that actually, that was recently in the news. That homeless guy who found the bag with $40,000 and he returned it to the owner, right? So that's what it says, that the poor person who returns a lost object to its owner. Why? Because the poor person says, I'm poor, I need this. God will understand if I keep it. Because I need it. But no, he returns it to its owner. That guy, was a good example of that. And a wealthy person who pays his ma'aser b'tzin'ah. He doesn't show off, he stands up in the synagogue, I want to pledge this and I'm going to pledge that on this. But he does it b'tzin'ah, he does it privately, and because he does it from his heart. Right? So these are people, each case is what? Somebody who could get away with things, right? You can get away with, because the person who's a single guy, he's a bachelor, he can, do whatever, he can get away with getting into trouble. The poor guy can keep the item for himself. The rich guy, nobody's going to know if he did maaser or not. If he keeps his business private, nobody's going to know if he gives tzedakah or not. So all these 3 people, God announces. That's why it says Hashem is machriz alehem. He announces how good they are. Because they're, even though they, in their private life, they could get away with a lot of trouble, they don't. Rav Safra was a single guy living in the city. And Tanei Tanaka made Rav Safra. One day somebody came and taught this teaching in front of Rav Safra. And of course he was very happy. Rav Safra tzavu panav. Right, tzavu panav to Rav Safra. Rav Safra was smiling. He said, wow, I'm a single guy living in the city and I've never done anything bad. I'm going to Olam. God loves me. I'm awesome. He said, Amar lo Rava says, Lav kegon mar. We're not talking about somebody like you. You don't count. Ela kegon Rav Chanina Rav Oshaya. We're talking about Rav Chanina and Rav Oshaya. Why? Tahavu ushkapi barad Yisrael. They were shoemakers in the land of Israel. That was their trade. Vavu yadeh b'shukat zonot. And where was their shop? Where the zonot were, where the prostitutes were the women who were of ill repute. Va'avdei lahu misanei lizonot. And they would make women's shoes. And so these bad ladies, would come in and want to get shoes. They would come in the shop. The women were looking at them, the rabbis. But they didn't look back at them. In other words, they were so tzanua, they did the business with them. Okay, so they weren't in Bnei Brak where they won't talk to you. They still talked to them and they gave them the shoes and they did the business, but they didn't in a lecherous, inappropriate way look at them. And that these women were so impressed by, because of course these women who are involved in this kind of business, they see the worst type, they see the low-life men who, the lower dregs of society. So when they saw these tzaddikim who were so righteous, they didn't look at the women. They started swearing by the lives of the holy rabbis of Eretz Yisrael. That's a Kiddush Hashem. When they saw when they would swear on something, they'd say, I swear by the life of the holy rabbis of Eretz Yisrael, because they saw how holy and how holy they were. So he said, that's the kind of single guy living in the city who stays out of trouble. That's really staying out of trouble when you're right in the middle of it. There are 3 people that God loves. Misha eno koes, somebody who doesn't get angry, or Misha eno mishtaker, somebody who doesn't get drunk. That's not mistaker. Somebody who's not mistaker, God doesn't love him. Mishtaker, he doesn't get drunk. And somebody who is not ma'amid al midotav, meaning to say he's a forgiving person. Somebody who's forgiving. There are 3 people that God hates. Somebody who is two-faced. He says one thing, he thinks another. Somebody who knows testimony that could help his friend and he doesn't want to come to court to help him. That's not nice. If you have the ability to help your friend, you should come. And somebody who, I wanted you to hear this actually because we just learned about this the other day. I'm glad you're here. Somebody who sees testimony, but he must hear too. Somebody who sees testimony who sees their friend doing something bad, but testifies yechidi. He testifies as an individual. Why is that bad? Because unless you have two witnesses, your testimony is nothing. So this guy, who's just one person and witnessed something bad and comes to court and testifies about it, what is he doing? All he's doing is giving a bad name to the guy, because he can't really accomplish anything with his testimony. He's just saying lashon hara in public, because he has no legal power when he says these words. This is a famous Talmudic story, that this guy named Tovia, or we would say Tuvia, like Tuvia the milkman, right? He did a sin, and Zigud, another guy, went and testified against him in the Bet Din. There was only one witness, Zigud. That was the only one. What happened? Nagdel Zigud. Rav Papa whipped Zigud for the testimony. Amarle, he said to him, Tovia chata v'Zigud min Gad? He said, Tovia is the one that did the sin, I'm telling you, and you're whipping me. Why are you whipping me? Amarle, yes. Dichtiv lo yakum ed echad be'ish. It says in the Torah, one witness should not stand up against somebody. Why? Because al pi shnei edim, because it has to be according to the testimony of two witnesses. So if you know that your testimony is not going to be accepted, is not going to be effective, keep your mouth closed. Why are you going and telling everybody? And you came and testified alone against him. That's why you get whipped, because you transgressed what the Torah says. Lo yakum ed echad be'ish. Unless your words are going to have an effect, all you're doing is bad-mouthing the guy. Shem Rabbe Alma Kama Pakt Be. All you're doing is giving him a bad name, and for that, I gave you the whipping. Amar Rabbi Shmuel bar Rav Yitzchak. Rabbi Shmuel, the son of Rav Yitzchak, said in the name of Rav, Amar Rav, Mutar l'snoto. You're allowed to have enmity towards somebody you see doing a bad thing. You witness somebody doing an Avirah. You're allowed to feel bad towards them, to hate them even, in other words, for their wickedness, but you're not allowed to go broadcast it to everybody. Because it says in the Torah, when you see the donkey of somebody who hates you, that is buckling under the weight of its load, you're supposed to help him. So the Gemara asks, "My soneh, what kind of hating is this?" And this is actually brought down in Halakha. It's brought down in the Rambam, brought down in the Rashi. My soneh, what does it mean? Somebody who hates you? Ile ma soneh nochri. Is it talking about a non-Jew who hates you? A non-Jew is allowed to hate you, because it doesn't say in the Torah about non-Jews that they're not allowed to hate you. It just says you're not allowed to hate a fellow Jew. But if a non-Jew wants to hate you, that's fine, right? V'atanya, it says in the Braita, Soneh she'amru soneh Yisrael. It's talking about a Jew who hates you. And yet, even though you know that this Jew hates you, you still help him if you see him on the side of the road with his donkey. And in fact, Chacham Ovadia, Zichrono Livracha, writes in one of his chuvot, if you see somebody with their car broke down on the side of the road, it's the same thing. You should stop and help them, right? Velo soneh nochri. So it's not talking about a non-Jewish guy who hates you. It's talking about a Jew. How can there be somebody? How can the Torah tell us that if you see somebody who hates you, you should help them? Didn't the Torah already say you're not allowed to hate another Jew? You're not allowed to hate. So how can it now talk about somebody who hates you? It shouldn't validate that person's feelings. It says you're not allowed to hate. So you're going to tell me that it means somebody that there is testimony in the court that he's a bad guy. So then you don't have to like him anymore. You don't have to like a guy that you know is a wicked guy. You just have to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. But if you know that this guy is bad and there's testimony he's bad, he's bad. So then why does it call it somebody who hates you? He doesn't hate only you. He's not the only person who hates you. Everybody hates you because now you're a criminal. So my shna. Hi, so why is it talking about somebody who hates you? What it means is, it's talking about a very specific case, that you saw another person do something evil. So you know they're a bad guy. You're allowed to have negative feelings towards them. You don't have to be a Pollyanna and think everybody is great. You're allowed to think that the person is bad, but you're not allowed to go broadcast it to everybody. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak amar mitzvah l'snoto. It's even a mitzvah not to like him. You shouldn't like a guy that you know is bad. You think you're being such a tzaddik because you like him?
You're supposed to love him, guys. What?
No, that's a different religion. You know, this is our. We don't like the bad guys. You know, because we don't want to be hung on the cross. That's why we dislike the guys. If we know they're bad, we don't like them. That's not fair, because Jesus is really nice to you in this world, but then he puts you in hell. That's not good. We say we're going to hate you now. Maybe you'll get in heaven in the end. It's a better system. I say this is, I'd rather that somebody be mean to me now and then I get in heaven. I don't want it to be nice to me now and turn the other cheek and then I end up in hell. I don't want that. I don't know. It's a toss up, Okay, so now what does he say? Shenemar Yirat Hashem. It says, actually it should say Yireh Hashem, right? This is a pasuk that, well, let's see which pasuk it's telling you. Yirat Hashem son otra. It says that the person who fears God hates evil. It's not that you hate the person, it's that you hate the evil that you see in the person. Amar Ravacha Brei de Rava, the Ravashi. Ravacha, the son of Rava, said to Ravashi, Ma'o lememra leile rabbe lemisanye. Should you tell your teacher? Should you tell on him? Tell the Rav, I saw Yonatan, he was doing bad stuff. Can I tell him? Amar le, iyadad meheman le rabbe kebetre lemale. In other words, what he says is, it all depends on whether your words are going to be effective. If this is a person that trusts you like two witnesses, that they're absolutely gonna trust you, and therefore you're gonna tell them, you should steer clear of this guy because he's got some bad qualities, then you should tell them. But if it's a person who's gonna take your words with a grain of salt, and you're just saying lashon hara about the other guy, you shouldn't do it. If it's something where you're really gonna help him, you're gonna tell him, you shouldn't be friendly with this guy, he's actually gonna take advantage of you, he's a bad guy, then it's worth telling. There are three people that their life is not a life. Who are these three people who don't have a life? The first one is harachmanin, people who can't say no. They're too nice. There's such a thing as being rahmanin. They're too nice. Okay, veharat hanin, people who are too angry. They have a temper. They have a bad life. They're always, they're always angry. They're always upset. Va'aninei hadat, and people who are oversensitive. Things are always bothering them. It's too cold. It's too hot. It's too this. It's too that. I can't. Those kinds of people are very picky. Va'amar Rav Yosef kulho itnehu bi. I have all those bad qualities. Man, I'm really unlucky. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught there are three who hate each other. Haklavim, dogs. In other words, they are competing because they're always competing with each other. Va'atar negolin, the chickens. Va'chabarin, and these are the Persian priests. They were called habarin. I assume the reason why they hate each other was because they competed for probably donations or whatever benefits they got from the people. They had to compete with one another in order to get them. So that's why they hated each other. V'yesh omrim afazonot, also prostitutes hate each other. We know that because they're competing for business. Yeah, they're catty. Even regular women tend to compete with each other and have like cattiness with each other. So certainly when it's their business, even the Talmidei Chachamim who live in Babylonia hate each other. In other words, they're competing with each other. Who's going to be the head of the academy? The politics, rabbinic politics that happened even then. There are three who love each other. Who are they? Elohen Hagirim, converts, because they feel like they have a common experience. They love each other. Va'avadim, slaves, because they're oppressed. These are groups that the Orvin and ravens. Okay, so apparently they work together to get food instead of fighting with each other. But the Avadim and the Gerim, we can see why, because they feel like they're in a disadvantaged position. They're outsiders. They're oppressed a little bit. So therefore they team up together instead of fighting. Arba'a in hadat sovaltan. There are four people that the mind cannot tolerate them. Okay, people can't take them. Who are they? Elohen dal ge'eh, a poor person who's arrogant. Why are you arrogant for? What do you have that you're so proud? Right, so people can't take that. A person who has a big ego but they have nothing. Okay, if a person has a big ego and they have something, fine. It's not good to have a big ego, but at least there's a reason. But they have nothing and they have a big ego. It's like when the Meshulachim who come to collect tzedakah, most of them are very humble and they're very, please help me, I'm in trouble. But some of them are like, you need to help me. How can you not give me more? You have to give me more. That's people don't like that. It's like, who are you? And then the other one is va'ashir mechachesh, a rich person who doesn't pay his obligations, right? He makes commitments and he doesn't pay. And you say, why can't you pay? You're rich.
That's why he's rich.
Right, that's why he's rich, exactly. That's what he probably thinks. V'zakin mina'ef, a promiscuous old man. Nobody likes the dirty old man, people don't like that type of that. Uparnas mitgala tzibur b'chinam, and the leader who treats the people arrogantly for no reason. In other words, he lords over them for no reason. If he has a reason that he has to assert his authority, people understand that. But if he doesn't, and he just wants to throw his weight around, people don't like that. So some people say also a guy who keeps divorcing and taking back his wife. What's wrong with this guy? Make a decision already. So, v'tana kama, why didn't the first Tana mention the guy who divorces and remarries his wife? Because sometimes he can't afford to divorce her. He has to take her back. He can't pay the ketubah, he has to take her back. Inami, alternatively, yesh lo banim hemena, or he has children with her, so we understand. They're having a hard time living together, but they have children, so they stay together for the sake of that. So he has trouble divorcing her. This is from last week's parasha, that Kenaan, the son of Ham, commanded his children 5 things. Rashbam says it doesn't mean he actually told them to do this. It means that this is the culture of Canaan, that it's as if it came from their ancestor. What did he tell them? Ahavu zeh, love each other. Va'avu et hagezel, love robbery. Right? Meaning perfect the art of stealing. Va'avu et hazima, enjoy illicit relations. V'sanuat adonechem, hate your masters. V'al tidabru emet, and don't tell the truth. In other words, that was the qualities that they had. So he said it must have come from their ancestor. They're so good at all those things that they must have. Shishat varim nemarim basus. There's 6 things that they say about the horse. Ohevet haznut. It's very promiscuous. I didn't know that. Ve'ohevet hamilchama. It likes to go into war. It's very exciting. Ve'rucho gasa. It's a very arrogant animal. U'moeset hashena. It doesn't like to sleep very much. Ve'ochel harbe u'motzi kima. It eats a lot, but it doesn't have a lot of waste. Okay, so some say that it wants to kill its owner in the war. In other words, it gets itself right into the middle of the war, and puts its master's life at jeopardy. There are 7 people who are minudin l'shamayim. They're excommunicated in heaven. Elohen Yehudi she'eno isha, a man who doesn't have a wife, who doesn't get married. It's not talking about that he can't find somebody. It means he chooses not to be married. V'sheyesh lo isha ve'en lo banim. He has a wife, but he doesn't have any children, meaning that they choose not to have children. Because otherwise, how can God blame you? It's not your fault. A person who has children, but he doesn't raise them to learn Torah. Somebody who doesn't wear tefillin, or tefillin on his arm, or he doesn't wear tzitzit, or he doesn't have a mezuzah on his door, or he doesn't wear shoes. Now that doesn't seem to fit into everything else, but you got to wear shoes. Shoes are important. And v'yesh omrim, av mi she'en mesev b'chavura shel mitzvah. Somebody who doesn't join in when people are getting together to do a mitzvah, and he says, "Listen, I'm busy, guys. I'm not going to be coming." That's also something that makes him fall into disfavor with Hashem, so to speak. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Amar Rabbi Shmuel Bar Marta. Rabbi Bar Chana said that Rabbi Shmuel Bar Marta said, Amar Rav, in the name of Rav, Mishum Rabbi Yossi, in the name of Rabbi Yossi Ish Hotzal. Minayin she'en sholin b'kaldim. How do we know that we don't go to psychics? Why don't we go to psychics? Shenemar tamim ti'em Hashem Elohecha. You should be perfect with Hashem your God. Meaning to say, you should trust God. If you do the right thing, God is going to take care. You don't need to know what the psychic tells you is going to happen. How do we know that if you know that your friend is greater than you, even in one thing, he's greater than you in any area, that you should treat him with respect by virtue of that you see a greatness in him. Shenemar, because it says in Sefer Daniel, Kal kavel di ruach yetirabe umalka asit lahakamute al kal melchuta. It says that he saw that Daniel, because the king saw that Daniel had a quality that was superior, that he had a superior insight, he made him in charge of his entire kingdom. The story of Daniel and the story of Yosef are very similar. Very similar. They're officers in a foreign court. They interpret dreams and they become, very important in the court. It's similar stories. So Daniel, because of that greatness that he had, the king elevated him to a high position. So too, when you see greatness in another person, you should give them kavod for that greatness. So this is an unrelated halacha that happens to be brought here in the name of the original, but we're going to get back to some interesting advice in a second. So what is dam tahor or dam tohar? This refers to what the Torah says, that when a woman gives birth, the first 7 days for a boy and the first 14 days for a girl, she is considered nidah. And then 33 days after that, in other words, if she has a boy for 7 days, she's nidah like a normal nidah, then she could go to the mikveh. And then 33 days after that, even if she bleeds, it's called dam tohar. It doesn't make her tameh. If she has a girl, 14 days she's nidah. At the end of that, 66 days, if she bleeds during 66 days, she will be tahor or tehorah. despite bleeding. Now, nowadays we don't really follow these halachot because they're too complicated. We just say wait until the woman stops bleeding and then she counts the 7 days and then she goes to the mikveh. But in the biblical and Talmudic times, they still followed this rule. So let's say a woman had a boy. She waited the 7 days. Then she waited the 33 days. So she's at the 40th day. So all this time, if on the 40th day she saw any blood, she wouldn't be nidah. But once the 40th day is over, now it's back to normal. So the rabbi said because of the possible confusion, that 41st day she shouldn't have relations. Why not? Because there's a chance she's going to see blood, think she's still in the 40 days, and make a mistake. And we don't want that to happen. So ad kama amar Rav ona. Rav says only one ona. Rashbam says ona means one night. Rashi says it means a day and a night. Okay, so either it's the night immediately after those 40 days are over. That's the only time she has to abstain, just to make a separation and to recognize that she's going back to regularly scheduled cycle. Or according to Rashi, a whole day has to pass. But in any case, so Tana, hu Yosef ish Hutzal. When it says Yosef ish Hutzal in the Talmud, hu Yosef Bavli, it's the same as Yosef Bavli that's mentioned in the Talmud. Hu Isi ben Gur Aryeh. This is the same as Isi ben Gur Aryeh, who's sometimes mentioned in the Talmud as well. Hu Isi ben Yehuda, hu Isi ben Gamliel. Okay, these are the same as Isi ben Yehuda and Isi ben Gamliel, hu Isi ben Mahalal El. Okay, so all of these people are really the same person. Okay, these people are all the same person. And then it says Uma Shimo. What's his real name? Isi ben Akavya Shimo. Okay, his name is really Isi ben Akavya. Isi probably comes from Yosef. It's a shortened. It's like Yossi. It's like it's a shortened name. So all of these people are actually the same person. Believe it or not, they just had so many nicknames for them. Hu Rabbi Yitzchak ben Tavla, Hu Rabbi Yitzchak ben Chakla, Hu Rabbi Yitzchak ben Ilah. Rabbi Yitzchak was sometimes called ben Tavla, ben Chakla, ben Ilah. Hu Rabbi Yitzchak ben Aha. Dishmata, Hu Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas de Agadata, that the Rabbi Yitzchak that's mentioned in regular halachic discussions is the same as Rabbi Yitzchak ben Pinchas that's mentioned in the Midrashim. V'simanech, and what's the sign to remember this? It should say Shim'uni Achai ve'ami, that which means Shim'uni Achai, because in Shmatita, which is Shim'uni, when we're doing a halachic discussion, he's called Acha. Okay, but other times he's called the Yitzchak ben Pinchas. Amar Rabbi Bar Chana, Rabbi Yochanan Mishmei Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Eli. Rabbi Bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, in the name of Rabbi Yehuda Bar Eli, Achol batzal v'shev batzel. See, this is a rhyme. Eat an onion and sit in the shade. Ve'lo techol avazin v'tarnegolin. Ve'he libach rodef alecha. Okay? And don't eat geese and chickens and your heart is going to chase after you. In other words, you're going to have more and more of an appetite for luxury if you start eating meat all the time. Eat an onion, sit in the shade. Okay? Achol batzal v'shev batzel. It's a good one. It's a good rhyme, right? You can remember that one. More money, more problems, man. For sure. Okay.
Batzal and batzel.
It sounds the same. Yeah. It sounds the same. Yeah. So he says, Pachot mimelcha o mimishtech. He says, he says, Pachot mi mechalcha o mishtecha. You should limit your eating and drinking. V'tosif al diratach. But you should add. If you're going to invest, don't invest in fancier food, because food is ingested and it's gone. It's consumed. Don't invest in consumables. Invest in your house. B'diratach. You're going to be happier if you're going to invest big money. Don't invest big money in getting the best steaks and getting crystal and what is it that they, and all that stuff. Don't invest in that. Invest in the house. The house is what's going to really benefit you much more. Kiyata Ula Amar. Ula came and he said, Matla matlin b'ma'arava. There's a saying that they have in Israel. This is also a nice one. He says, Da'achil alita tashi ba'alita. A person who eats, alita is the fatty tail, right? The aliyata or the alita. He eats the fatty tail. In other words, he's eating a lot of meat. He's going to hide in the attic. Why? Because he's going to go into debt. He's eating too much meat. He's going to become poor, right? However, he says, "Da'achil kakulei akiklei de mata shachiv." But the person who just eats vegetables, he can sleep in the dumps of the city. What is he trying to say? What he means is like this: if you eat luxurious food, fancy food, you're going to end up hiding in the attic for all the creditors that are coming to collect. You're going to hide upstairs. But at least if you eat cheap food, you can rest out in the public square. Nobody's going to be chasing you, because in other words, what he's saying is live within your means. Live within your means. You won't have creditors banging on your door, so you eat vegetables. Whereas if you live beyond your means and you're serving fancy food all the time, then you're going to end up hiding in the attic, because the creditors are going to be knocking at the door all the time. So this is wise advice from the Chachamim about not investing money in fancy food. That's the general principle. Don't invest so much money. I like that. Achol batzel v'shev batzel. If you eat onions, you sit in the shade. In other words, you see that? Right. If you eat... If all you eat is onion, you could sit out, you'll be relaxed. It's a relaxed life. But if you start eating meat, then the bills are going to go up. So that's the lesson of the Gemara. And then Be'ezrat Hashem, we continue now actually with halachot related to the Seder of Pesach and Kiddush of Shabbat in the upcoming daf.